Hello everyone and welcome to game 14 of the 1921 World Chess Championship match between Emanuel, Lasker and Raul Capablanca. This is the last game of the championship match, and I would just like to congratulate everyone who's been here from the beginning of the Capablanca saga. It's been quite a journey. I myself learned really a lot about the great Cuban. I hope you did as well. And there is a reason why I'm recording with shades, but I will mention that at the end of the video. So without further ado, this is game 14. Lasker opens with e4, like in the previous games, with e5 by Capablanca, knight f3, knight to c6, and of course the Raul Lopez is on the board. Bishop to b5, we have knight to f6, the Berlin defense by Capablanca, and now castles by Lasker. With d6 and d4, bishop to d7, unpinning and developing the light square bishop, knight to c3, and now bishop to e7. Capablanca is ready to castle kingside, and here nowadays we would probably see something like rook to e1, but in those days bishop captures on c6 was the way to go. So bishop captures and now queen to d3, defending the e4 pawn. With e captures on d4, knight captures on d4, putting pressure on the bishop, and now bishop to d7 for the moment. Capablanca keeps the bishop pair with bishop to g5 by Lasker, and Capablanca castles kingside. Rook 8 to e1 by Lasker, and here there is h6. A year after this match was played, Capablanca had this exact same position with the white pieces. He played against Hamilton. Hamilton tried knight to g4 in this position, but Capablanca won a very nice game with white here. So here Capablanca plays h6, which is in fact a better move. Bishop to h4, and now knight to h7, just offering a trade of bishops. Bishop captures, queen captures, and now knight to d5. Lasker gets this d5 square for his knight with an attack on the queen, so he will get c4 without wasting any time. Queen back to d8, and now c4. And here Lasker has an excellent position. Those two knights are really awesome. Capablanca says that black is okay, but black has to be very careful. For example, if you try to kick away the knight with c6 right away, then you leave the weak d6 pawn, and you're not really gonna get it away from d6 due to the c4 and e5 pawns guarding the d5 square. So here, after let's say knight e3, white will go knight f5 to go after the d6 pawn. For example, rook e8, and now knight d to f5. You're going after the d6 pawn. Bishop captures, knight captures, the other knight now attacks the d6 pawn as well. And now rook to e6. And while you can play this, it's very ugly, and Capablanca says it's... he doesn't want to play this with black. White can just easily continue attacking the d6 pawn, and even after knight f6, going after the e4 pawn, rook fe1 defends it, and still white will be better. So here Capablanca plays rook e8, and now Lasker plays f4, really changing the structure of the position. And but on the other hand, it allows Capablanca now to play c6, because Lasker opened up this diagonal, which will favor Capablanca's queen. Here Capablanca plays c6, but now it's a bit different. Now if you try the same idea, knight e3 to f5, you get queen to b6, and now this diagonal is open, so white will have to waste a move. King h1, now you get knight to f6, and now the same idea no longer applies. If you play knight to f5, you just get d5, and the black gets rid of his backwards d pawn, as the knight now nicely guards the d5 square. So Lasker retreats to c3, and now queen to b6, again taking control of this diagonal and also putting pressure on the b2 pawn. Lasker plays b3, he gets rid of this weakness, and now rook 8 to d8. Capablanca says that this is maybe a waste of time, but it's again one of those cases where Capablanca says his move is a waste of time, but it is in fact recommended by the engine. He says maybe rook e7 followed by rook e8, doubling up on the e file instantly would have been better. But okay, rook 8 to d8, and now king to h1. Lasker wants to unpin. He doesn't want to have his knight paralyzed on d4 forever. Knight to f6 by Capablanca, going after the e4 pawn, and now even though Lasker controls more center, his e4 pawn is weak, and now Capablanca will do whatever he can to undermine it. With h3, taking away the g4 square from Capablanca's pieces, bishop to c8. We have rook to d1. Capablanca doesn't like this move. He says that black should somehow go for a kingside attack or something and look for his chances there. But what are you gonna do? Again, rook to d1, Lasker's move is the top move recommended by the engine. So it's not only Capablanca that he says his own moves are a waste of time, he also thinks that about other people's moves, which are, of course, in this case, the strongest moves. But okay, rook e7, now Capablanca shifts to his plan of doubling up on the e-file. We have rook f e1, and now rook d to e8, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. And now rook to e2. With queen to a5, now Capablanca wants to shift the queen over to the king side with queen to h5. So rook to f1, queen to h5, the a2 pawn is guarded, so there's nothing to do there. And now king to g1. You don't want your king on the same file as the queen to allow some knight to g4 ideas maybe. With a6 by Capablanca, and now rook f to f2. With queen to g6 by Capablanca, now again with attacking the pawn 4 times, and also clearing the h5 square for the knight if needed. Then the knight maybe can come to g3, maybe it can attack f4 at some point, depending all on what Lasker plays. And here Lasker plays rook to f3. Capablanca mentions that knight f5, although it seems interesting, could be dangerous. For example, if bishop captures on f5, pawn captures on f5, and now queen to h5, g4 attacks the queen, but the queen has a safety square on h4. So queen to h4, and now you will play something like king to g2, and black does not mind this position. So after this queen to g6, we have rook to f3 by Lasker, and now comes queen to h5. With f5, and here Capablanca says that, okay, you do lock his light square bishop out of the game, but on the other hand, you leave the e5 square open for Capablanca's pieces. For example, maybe the knight can go to d7, then to e5 would be very strong. So he likes it, but he doesn't like it. Here, queen to h4, again, freeing the h5 square for the knight. The knight can now come to f4 if needed to try and fork the queen and the rook. And here, Lasker's best course of action is probably rook f to e3, just doubling up on the e-file and forcing Capablanca to look for some ideas here. But Lasker played king to h2 here, and it doesn't work. Lasker probably had some sort of an idea that if Capablanca makes some sort of a silly move, then he can play g3, force the queen back, and play rook to f4. But Capablanca, of course, as you can imagine, did not play a useless move. Capablanca played a different move. Just to show you, knight captures on e4 doesn't work. If knight captures on e4, then g3 is very strong. And this was, in fact, Lasker's idea. Because then you get knight captures on c3, g captures on h4, and now knight captures on e2. So Capablanca would grab a lot of material here, but it would still favor white. For example, f6, f6 by white, attacking the rook, and now you would get rook to e4, getting the rook out of the way. Knight captures on e2, rook captures on e2 with check, and king to g1. And here it's just black did achieve something, but not all that much. Here, white would still be better. So here, Capablanca played a different move, and you're welcome to pause the video and try to find this, we can call it a winning idea for Capablanca. Maybe not right away, but feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for Capablanca in this position. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you have just won the World Chess Championship title. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, Capablanca played knight to g4 check. And it does make sense as it comes with check, and now the knight is coming to e5 without wasting any time, which means you are winning the exchange. Lasker played king to h1 and now knight to e5. The queen and rook are under attack with queen to d2 and now just knight captures on f3. With knight captures on f3 and queen back to f6. Queen to g3, Capablanca also mentions that was possible, but could be somewhat dangerous, so he prefers to bring the queen back with queen to f6. It's not that Lasker just blundered a piece. There is much poison in this position. For example, Capablanca mentions that you could try you could try a lot of different approaches here. For example, you could try something like g4, and then after Capablanca strikes on the queen side, which he prepared with b5, then you play e5, and here black has to give back the exchange, because if you capture with the pawn, knight e4 traps Capablanca's queen. The queen has nowhere to go. So here you would have to give back the exchange with rook captures, but then you just get knight captures, rook captures, and Capablanca is very comfortable playing this position, being up a pawn. Lasker doesn't like his chances there. Instead of going for the exchange, he plays a4. He prevents Capablanca's counterplay on the queen side with b5. And now just g6, going after the pawn here. You have to do something about it, as you don't want to allow all the traits here. So f captures on g6, f captures on g6, and now already Capablanca has a threat of bishop captures on h3, which would free the knight for captures. So rook to e3, just defending the knight, and now bishop to f5. Capablanca now piles up on the e4 pawn. And here we have queen to d3. There is a very interesting line, also Capablanca mentions it in his book, rook to d3, going after the d6 pawn instead. And then you get this line, bishop captures, rook captures with an attack on the queen, queen g7, and now knight to h4, preparing to capture the bishop and capture on g6 to win the queen. But then black plays bishop f5, you get knight captures, g captures, and the rook captures on h6. This seems very dangerous for Capablanca if Lasker went for this, but luckily Capablanca has rook e1 check, king h2, and queen to e5 check. g3, and now that the second rank has been freed for Capablanca's rooks, now Capablanca had in store queen captures on c3. Just a nice queen sacrifice to prepare mate, because if you capture, you get rook to e2 mate. And if you don't capture, for example, if white goes for queen g5 check, tries to mate you, the black queen is in time to prevent checks. The white has no longer any attacking options here, and you are just down a whole rook. If you try rook g6 to win the queen, then you again get mated rook to e2 mate. So Capablanca saw all of this after bishop to f5, and Lasker of course saw it, so he didn't go for rook to d3. He played queen to d3, but now g5. With knight to d2, bringing more defenders to the e4 pawn, and now bishop back to g6, freeing the f-file for the queen. With b4 now, white wants to exchange as many pawns as possible on the queen side. With queen to e6, and now comes b5 as planned. With a captures, and now Capablanca brings the rook over to the a file, going for rook to a1 check. Lasker prevents this with queen to b1, and now queen to e5. A nice centralizing move with the queen. You're pressuring the knight here. If the knight moves, then rook to a1, still an idea. You're just going to win the queen. So queen to e1 by Lasker. Lasker prepares queen to g3 to trade queens and try to hold the position, being down the exchange. King to h7 by Capablanca, first improving the position of his king. B captures, and now queen to g3, offering a queen trade. And Capablanca says, you are not holding this position. With queen captures, rook captures, and now rook to a3. Pinning the knight, as the rook on g3 is undefended, so king to h2, defending the rook, and now rook to b7. Here Capablanca's threat is rook to b2. This would win the knight. Just to give you an example, for example, if you play something like, let's say, king to h1 or something, then rook b2 attacks the knight, and the knight has nowhere to go. Your pawns are preventing your knight from escaping. If you go knight f3, then the rook no longer controls the c3 knight, so you just capture it. And if you try knight f1, it's a very nice idea. Rook c2, a double attack on the knight, and after the knight moves, you just capture, and after rook captures on g3, you're just going to recapture. Yes, you are going to recapture. Sorry, seems the interface froze for some reason. No idea why this happened. Really just weird. But yeah, okay, here we are. So after this idea, we said that after knight captures on g3, rook c1 just pins the knight and attacks it. So after rook to b7, Lasker played c5. He had to clear the c4 square for his knight, and now we get d captures on c5 by Capablanca, knight to c4 attacking the rook, and now rook to a1 with knight to e5, and here comes rook to c1. Capablanca says that a student of the game should really study the movements of the rook here, as there are, as Capablanca says, there are few moves that would be better than this one. Rook to c1. A small improvement recommended by the engine is bishop to e8, just dominating white's knight here, probably to defend the c6 pawn as well. But Capablanca's plan works just as well, as Capablanca decided to give up the c6 pawn, as you'll see in the game. So rook to c1, attacking the knight here, so the rook is stuck guarding it with h4, and now Capablanca says that the stage has been set for his idea. Rook to e7, now attacking this knight. Knight captures on c6, and now rook to e6, attacking the knight once again. Knight to d8, and now g captures on h4. The idea is that if knight captures, you capture this with check, and then you pick up the c3 knight as well. So Lasker, of course, cannot afford this with rook to d3, and now rook to f6. Now Lasker says that his control, Capablanca says that his control of the f-file ensures that Lasker has no more tricks left up his sleeve. Rook d7 check, king to h8, now controlling the f7 square, and now knight to d5, attacking the rook. But rook f to f1, now threatening rook to h1 mate, as the g3 square is covered by the pawn. So Lasker has to run with king to h3, and now bishop captures on e4. And in fact, it was in this position on move 56 that Emanuel Lasker resigned the game, and we have a new world champion, Jose Raul Capablanca. The reason Lasker resigned here is that, well, whatever you do, the threat is bishop to f5, which comes with check and picks up your rook, and if you do something about that, still the bishop can come to f5, take away the g4 square. You can again threaten mate, so probably king captures on h4 to get out of mate, and then you get bishop captures to rook captures, and you threaten either rook cd1 or rook fd1. You can even play this rook just to trade more pieces, and the only way to avoid trades is to check and then maybe defend the knight. But then the c4 pawn will, for example, win the game. If knight e5, go after the pawn, now you just pin the knight. And then if check, you're going to go king g8. And now, again, you can't move the rook. I mean, you have to move the rook to defend the knight. You can't move the knight because you lose the rook. So rook e7, but now just c3. And if knight g4, you get out of the way. Now you get rook h1 check. King g3, c2. Now there's no stopping c1. Even if white wins something, let's say knight f6 check, king f8, you're gonna win some material, but then finally Capablanca brings the queen into the game, and that's that. Of course, Lasker knew all this, and after bishop captures on e4, he resigned the game. So yeah, that's the last game, game 14. Capablanca wins the series with 4 wins, 10 draws, and 0 losses. So that's quite an accomplishment, taking away the World Chess Championship title without a single loss. But something Lasker pretty much saw coming, as if you remember, if you've watched the negotiations video, Lasker already said that he no longer wishes to be world champion, that he wants to give up his title to Capablanca, and he would like to fight him in this match as challenger. But yeah, we're gonna talk a bit more about this, what comes after this, in a separate video, as a lot of you requested that we do a conclusion of the Capablanca saga in a separate video, so that's what we're gonna do when I regain my eyesight back. The reason why I'm wearing shades is I have some sort of an eye condition, so I didn't want my zombie-like appearance to distract you from all the chess, so that's why the shades are there. But yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Bradley Nixon, Iman Shakib, Oliver Sperlik, Doug McNabb, and Law Office John Butler for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. I will pretty much be just checking up on your suggestions, as until I fully regain my sight, I'm not going to do the conclusion of the Capablanca saga, so feel free to suggest anything, and I'm just going to do videos based on your suggestions. So yeah, thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.